Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I am starting a micro series within the podcast where I introduce you to books that I think are beneficial to artists. You see, there's this idea that I've had for a while, and that idea is to sort of shift how the arts are taught at the university level. So, film school, art school, creative writing MFA programs. I really think that they need to tackle sort of this idea of growing one's emotional intelligence because there's just so many people going into the arts who haven't quite figured out how to comport themselves when faced with rejection, when faced with the difficulties of sort of getting themselves out there, getting their work out there. And we focus so much on craft. We focus so much on the business side of it. We focus so much on our pitch letters and, what literary journals to send our stories to, what film festivals, and how to get our work so that it's acceptable by these institutions, that we forget about ourselves. We forget about, well, okay, what's this process doing to me mentally? Is it actually, how is this damaging me? And so I want to introduce you to books that I think should be sort of almost like general education textbooks 101. Like, these are the things that I think art school should start with because, the art life is more than just craft. It's more than just, trying to get an edge business wise. You really got to take care of yourselves. It's so easy to lose sight. And so the first in this micro series is the book 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do by author Amy Morin. And I have Amy here on the podcast today. So let's get started. Hello.
Hello. Hey, Eric.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Good.
Yeah.
So I haven't woken up this early since April.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you getting up for this.
Yeah. Well, the stakes are high now, so.
I love it. I like to sleep in too, and I just started working at Very Well, and they start at 9 in the morning, and I have to say it was quite an adjustment when I first started working there because I was all awesome, good. So we log in at 9 a.m. every day, and some of these people, they're like all dressed up and ready to go at 9 a.m. for their Zoom calls, and I'm like, yeah, I don't promise my hair is going to be combed, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, I've been talking with this nutritionist through Zoom. A fascinating set of meetings, but I always feel like I have to shower before, and it's so weird because they're probably not even paying attention what's on the screen.
My trick is I just use my old laptop where the camera's really grainy. So
that's not a bad idea.
Yep, strange world we live in now, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I honestly I couldn't have predicted. I was thinking about kind of growing up and what we had and didn't have, and I don't know, I just couldn't have predicted this idea of a smartphone, let alone just video communications. Even though science fiction stories always told us video communications was inevitable.
Yeah, no, I agree. So weird.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming on here. We are
Sure
live.
All right.
So, the reason I reached out was because there's this idea I have, and it's an epic idea, and it involves kind of retooling how film, art, and creative writing is taught in schools, where a huge part of that would be to also teach emotional intelligence and how to grow emotional intelligence. And I think that books like yours would be beneficial to artists who are just starting out, because it really takes an enormous amount of emotional intelligence to kind of not only stay in this sort of life, but to even be remotely successful at it, because it's such a an unpredictable, grueling lifestyle. You know, the arts,
Right.
and this idea of mentally strong things people don't do. It's remarkable to me that this isn't like a staple, almost like a general education requirement in art school. And so I wanted to talk to you about some of the points in this book, because my podcast is mostly geared towards people who are interested in pursuing the art life, but it's also, you know, partially me just ranting, but mostly people people who are interested in pursuing the art life and don't know where to start. And some of it's incredibly practical, technical stuff. Some of it's just ideas on how to pursue clients. But this is something that I think could even be the most beneficial for a lot of people, because they're not thinking about how thick their skin has to be.
I completely agree. And thank you for all those kind words about my work.
Yeah.
But, even if I hadn't written the book, if I came across this material, I would agree as well. And as a therapist, when I was still working in a regular day job, I mean, so many people who would come into my office lack some pretty basic skills. And so no matter how successful they were, or no matter how good things were in their lives, they were just struggling, and it's not their fault. It's that we don't teach these things at a younger age. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote a kids book. My next book, actually, that comes out in April, is geared towards kids, because I think if we can start teaching these skills to people at a younger age, they'll dare to try to live their dreams. And then when they fail, they won't conclude, well, gee, I wasn't good at this. They'll try again. Or when they make a mistake, they'll know that it's not the end of the world, and you can learn from those mistakes. And so I really want young people to learn about persistence and perseverance, and how do you deal with anxiety, and how do you manage your struggles in a healthy way, because nobody's talking about it. And I think now that the pandemic has hit, I think it's becoming more mainstream to talk about mental health and our coping strategies. For a lot of people, our everyday coping skills were taken away from us. We couldn't go to the gym, or we couldn't have coffee with friends. So we're figuring out, well, what else do I have? And for a lot of people, it was not much. And so, I mean, it's why we're seeing alcohol rates skyrocket right now. And we're hearing from so many people who say, I can't stop eating, because they're struggling to figure out, how else do I cope with my feelings?
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. You know, I'm not going to go through everything in the book, but I do kind of want to like peruse it and kind of pull out the stuff that I think we could start with.
Sure.
You know, there's this one part that I think it really just like taps into where many artists seem to go once they've started working or practicing. And that's this idea of resenting their peers' success. Success of their peers. And you got chapter 9, they don't resent other people's success. That's what, you know, one of the 13 things mentally strong people don't do is they don't resent other people's success. And so I wanted to start with that, because that's the major problem I see for the most part with a lot of people in the arts. But it also really goes into sort of the main idea I've been promoting, in terms of like best ways artists can actually promote themselves is to support other artists. And so this idea of avoiding resentment because somebody has success, that it's almost like, I don't know, it's one of those things where like, oh, somebody has written about it. It's just not going into the hands of the people that, as of yet, the people that I think that should be getting it first. And that's, of course, people in film school.
Yeah. So I don't know a lot about filmmakers in general, but in learning more about the arts, as I became an author and I learned what it's like in the writing world. And now that I launched my own podcast and my producer gets me lots of guests in the music industry, I see what it's like for musicians and producers who work in music. And there is so much competition, and people tend to think that their competition is somebody else. If somebody else succeeds, somehow that takes it away from me, or it's evidence that I'm not good enough, or that should have been me, or they don't deserve to be there because either they're a bad person or they don't work as hard as I do. And I've seen it a lot where people tend to take their eyes off of what they're working on and they just really start focusing more on what other people are doing. And they're angry, they're bitter, they get frustrated, and it really can change how they feel about themselves. They start to think, well, I'm not good enough. If that person succeeds, then it means I wasn't good enough to succeed. Or they tend to look for reasons to, tear the other person down, which we all do in life sometimes. And we see somebody who's successful, we tend to think, well, that person isn't as good as I am, or here are the 3 reasons why this person shouldn't be there. And it gives us like a moment of temporary relief, but ultimately it makes us feel worse in the end. And to know that just because someone else is successful, it doesn't take away your success, that it's okay for somebody else to succeed, and it doesn't mean that you aren't doing as well. And I like to think of it this way. If you were a student and you got a C on a paper, the way that you would feel about that C would probably be highly dependent on how the rest of the class did. If your teacher said, well, you got a C, but everybody else got an A, you might feel really bad about that C. But if you got a C and the teacher said, you're actually the only one who passed the test, everybody else got an F, suddenly that C seems like it's a really good grade. And when it comes to like anything in the arts, it's subjective. It's all about figuring out, well, what's your purpose? And is your purpose, what does success look like to you? Is it really about getting an award or an achievement? You can't control that. You can't control who gets picked for an award, but you can control how much effort and energy you put into a project.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I almost think that with artists, especially filmmakers and writers, the problem is rooted in the story that they think they have to have. So like with a lot of filmmakers, it's, oh, I have to go to this festival. I have to go to one of these 5 festivals because these are the 5 top festivals, and I get one of the awards. But it has to be one of these top 5 awards because all the people I modeling myself after also got those awards, and this is a very real problem. And yeah, it's no wonder so many filmmakers born after 1980 aren't really at this. Nobody's really ever gotten to the status in terms of like actual industry success as the baby boomer generation. And I think it's rooted in sort of this idea that this story that you have to do it a certain way. And if you don't do it a certain way and your peers do it a certain way, then almost what are you worth because you didn't have that same story, that kind of idea. And I think it is rooted in this.
Yeah, and I guess if we're talking about people born, 1980 and over, we're looking at people who, as they became into the working world, the internet was invented, and then social media, and it became much easier to know what everybody else is doing all the time, right?
Yeah. Oh my
I,
God. Yes.
Whereas in past generations, you didn't necessarily know what everybody was doing unless they were on the big stage and they won a big award. But even then, it wasn't in your face all the time.
Yeah, and I haven't gotten around to it, but there's apparently now a documentary on Netflix about social media and the damage that it's been doing.
Oh yeah,
You
yeah.
heard about that? I haven't
The,
seen it yet, but I'm going to hit that up.
yeah, it's good. It really sort of just shows you exactly what it does to your brain and why we keep going back to it, even though there's a part of us that knows it isn't good for us, yet we keep checking it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, so I've been waiting for my phone to upgrade for like the past 2 months. I've had it on order because I can't have any social media on it. My old phone is just so too old. It's too old now. I can't even put the Facebook app on it, and it's creating me so much anxiety.
Interesting, right? And we get so sort of like it's this passive thing that we do whenever we're bored. You're in line and you're waiting for something. You're in an office waiting for an appointment. You check it. A commercial comes on TV, and we aren't even aware of that we're doing it. It's just become such a habit for most of us. And it's not to say social media is bad or a technology is damaging us. It's just about how we choose to use it and just becoming more aware. And so I know some people who delete their apps on purpose because they say, if it's on my phone and I get alerts, I can't not check it. So they just delete their apps. Or other people who say, I only check it certain hours during the day. And I think trying to come up with some rules for ourselves that are realistic could be really good for us, but it's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, can I ask you a question? Why do people expect immediate results typically?
I think we part of it is the world that we live in. You know, if you want to order something on Amazon, you can get it in 24 hours or sometimes 2 hours, depending on where you live. Or when we want things these days, we want it fast. And I think it's partly because our digital world makes things happen right away. And when you and I grew up, we couldn't just Google something every second when we wanted an answer. You had to go digging for it if you really wanted it. But the world's changed. If you want things now, for the most part, you'll get it fast. And because of that, we expect everything to happen fast. We think that if we're going to get healthier, that should happen overnight. Or we think if we're going to combat our depression or treat our anxiety, that if we're not seeing results in a week, it must not be working. And it was something I would see in my therapy office a lot, that people would come in and say, "This isn't working. I need something else." And they wanted a pill, a magic wand, something. And I get it. Nobody likes to suffer. We don't want to go through hard times, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of our changes in life, the ones that really matter the most, take the longest. And you really have to know how to stick to it and be willing to put in the hard work to get there. And of course, it feels good when we see some kind of results because it motivates us to keep going. And sometimes things don't always go in a straight line. They get a little bit worse before they get better. And if we see something that's not it's not getting better, like you start working out at the gym, you see results in the first 2 weeks, and then by week 3 your progress slows a little, or you gain a couple pounds, or you didn't run that mile as fast as you did last week, suddenly we think, well, this didn't work, and we're more tempted than ever to throw in the towel.
Yeah, I found that that's the case with me right now with my nutritionist because she's got me doing this thing based on not any kind of strange diet. It's based on more chemistry. So I'm supposed to have a measured amount of carbs with a measured amount of proteins with everything, and I lost like 10 pounds in the first 2 weeks, but then it slowed and then it slightly reversed, but then it kept going, but at a slower pace. And man, it can be really excruciating just to have to sit here and wait for it to actually happen.
I can imagine. That's a great example of how hard that must be, because we want to know, is this working? And yeah, I see it with people who say try a medication. Somebody who says, okay, I'm going to try a pill for depression. Well, it doesn't kick in instantly. Some of them take 4 to 6 weeks. And I
Oh, wow.
totally understand the frustration. You wait 6 weeks and then it's still like it happened kind of gradual. So sometimes people are like, I can't really tell if it's working. So then the question is, do you up the dose? Do you try a different medication? These things are tough. And figuring out how do I cope in the meantime becomes a much better strategy than trying to figure out, how do I keep changing plans? So sometimes we keep switching things up way too fast, and we try 17 different things. You might be tempted to say, I'm going to try a different diet plan, I'm going to try something else, I'm going to hire a different nutritionist. And the more we keep changing things up like that, the harder it is to even know if what we're doing is working. So it becomes about thinking, how do I cope with the anxiety, how do I cope with the disappointment I'm experiencing, how do I make sure that I stay the course despite the fact that I'm not all that motivated at the moment, or because I'm not seeing success. That becomes really hard to then say, how am I going to do this all day again today?
Yeah. Totally. This is really hitting a core. So, the first chapter of your book, which you were kind enough to send me, and you even autographed it, and also you made a notation about my cats, and I really appreciated that.
Which I heard your cats a couple minutes ago. So
Yes. So Jan is trying to keep them from being quiet, so she's constantly letting them in and out of the bedroom as quietly as she possibly can. But my listeners are very used to hearing them because there's eight
excellent.
in a small one-bedroom New York City apartment, and so it's bound to be part of the show. So you know what I was thinking about how to approach this idea of people don't waste time feeling sorry for themselves, and I'm actually become interested. I don't know if this is really something you've thought about, but what I'm thinking about is how the hell did humans evolve to even be able to feel sorry for themselves? Because it doesn't seem like it could work it to our benefit in the jungle or whatever, you know? Do you ever think about that?
You know, I now that you bring that up, like that's a good point, right? Like our ancestors weren't like sitting around moping for 3 days because they didn't kill the lion or something. They just had to get back up and get back to work. It wasn't really an option to sit around and throw yourself a pity party. You didn't have time for that stuff.
Yeah, I love that term, pity party.
But I think in our world today, although things have gotten quote unquote easier, on one hand, we're dealing with different kinds of stress and different sorts of problems that, we probably haven't evolved to deal with. So looking at other people who get awards, they get recognition, they get success, causes us to then again, it, like we said before, it changes the story you tell about yourself. It can cause you to start thinking I'm not good enough. And all of those kinds of thoughts just feel, I'm it's okay to sit around and feel this way because uh, the world's been unfair. And out of all of the chapters in the book, this is the one that I think I get the most angry responses to. And usually when people are angry about this chapter, it's because they've confused sadness with self-pity, and that it's okay to be sad when something
Yeah.
doesn't go well, when you're grieving something or you're missing somebody or you've gone through tough times. By all means, be sad, but just don't cross the line into self-pity. Self-pity is when you start to think that your life is so bad it will never get better, or that your problems are so big there's nothing anybody can ever do about it. It's when you become helpless and hopeless and you give up. And all of us have probably been there at some point where we think this is never going to work out, I'm never going to be able to do this, I'm never going to be able to be successful. And you have
Yeah.
times like that, but for some people it almost becomes a way of life.
I would almost liken it to like this idea of first world problems versus, oh shit, my grandmother just died. You should be very sad that your grandmother just died, but maybe your first world problems aren't as big of a deal as you think they are. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of how I took that chapter.
Uh, Absolutely, because sometimes we think, if I get stuck at a red light and it makes me 3 minutes late for work, it's because the universe is trying to punish me. And then we get into this whole inner monologue about how awful the world is and how unfair it is and how our lives are not good. And then you stop and you think, I'm going to a job that pays me money. Like my life's not that bad.
Do you find that do you find a lot of people now that you've talked about people responding to various chapters, it never occurred to me that, oh, of course you would get emails and whatever about the various content. How much do people respond to this idea of well, they shouldn't please everyone? Is that a major problem?
For a lot of people, it is. Some people are, oh, I've never had that problem. But I do get a fair amount of emails from people that say, it's just kind of ingrained in me. It's something I've always done, and I don't know how to get rid of it. And I'd say slightly more women than men, but I get a fair amount of men too who say, I just can't help it. I don't want somebody to be mad at me, or I struggle to express my ideas or my opinions. And often it kind of goes back to childhood where somebody maybe got praised a lot for being a good kid or for being a nice person. And I see it in people too who they just don't want to be seen as selfish, or they don't want to be seen as somebody who's not generous. And so they think that by saying yes to everything, that will make them be accepted and they'll be liked and they'll be proving to others that they are generous. But they forget that they really lose sight of their values and who they are along the way.
Yeah, you know, so true. And I, I think the reason one of this everything about this resonates with me so much. I even love that in this you pull out Richard Branson as an example, because I don't know if you knew this, but one of my first jobs in New York City when I moved here, like I did this cold remove from the state of Maine and came here without family, without friends, without adequate financial resources and rooted myself here with almost nothing. And one of my first jobs was working for Richard Branson with the U.S. side of the Virgin Entertainment Group.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And so his stories always resonated with me. Pretty much everything you summarize in this chapter about taking calculated risks really, I mean, that story is something I leaned heavily on in my first 10 years here. And I don't have this book anymore, but he was my first sort of nonfiction book where that I read, that I really honored and treasured. And so, I don't know, it's just, there's all these little things that keep popping up in this book where I'm just like, oh my God, yes. And then I'd go a few more pages and I'd be like, oh my gosh, yes. And
I'm glad you hear it resonating.
I can't imagine what the other variants are like if this is this good. And so, you know, I think this is going to be the start of a micro series within this, where I just kind of delve a little bit into various books that I think would be good textbooks for artists. And I really, I won't go down the whole list of other books that I think that should be involved in this, because it's your podcast, it's your episode.
I'm curious to know a couple of them.
I'll tell you one, but but before we segue, I am interested because I saw that you have one on kids coming out. I saw it on your Goodreads profile. I guess it's a profile. And I was wondering what the difference would be between like mentally strong people and mentally strong kids. Like, what are some of the content differences?
So a lot of it is based on it'll help kids grow up to not do the 13 things mentally strong people don't do, so that they can avoid those if we can give them the skills earlier. So for instance, I want kids to know, how do you deal with really big feelings like sadness in a healthy way, and then you don't grow up to end up feeling sorry for yourself when something doesn't go your way. And this one, whereas all of my other books about what not to do, this one is about what to do, because my hope is if we can teach young kids now, here's what to do. It's written for the 8 to 12-year-old market. But if we teach them these positive skills, these things that you can do, the stories you tell yourself, how to talk to yourself when you get rejected, or what to do when somebody's mean to you, if they know those skills now, they won't grow up to, say, resent somebody else's success.
Yeah.
And, I was talking to, when we were trying to come up with the concept for the book too, I was talking to my niece and she said, yeah, kids don't really like being told what not to do. We get enough of that from our parents. I said, yeah, you're right.
Well,
so this is going to be a book about what to do.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is just simply the fact that you're using positive reinforcement in the title and the language makes a huge difference. And it's just like, well, adults get the don't do, children get the do. Here's what you should do.
Exactly. And, because we didn't get this as kids, we didn't talk about feelings that much, or when we did, it was more about, I don't know, don't be mad or don't be upset about this. We didn't say, hey, it's okay to be angry, but here's what you do with angry feelings. It depends what you do with those emotions that matters. It doesn't matter that you feel angry, that's fine. But if you hit somebody, hitting is bad. It's not being angry is bad. And so I wanted this book to really just help kids figure that out. And there was such a push, I think, in the 80s about self-esteem, in the 90s, that you had to have really high self-esteem. But yet we didn't really give people skills so they could feel good about themselves. We just praised the heck out of them. You're the fastest kid in the whole school. Well, no, you're probably not. Or even if you are, that's not the only good thing about you. So let's figure out what else is good.
What a difference it would have made, though, they actually said, it's okay to be angry, but here's what you do with it. Yeah. I've never heard that spoken by an adult until after the late 2000s. And it's just like, how much bullying could have been dealt with?
Right.
Just by parents teaching their kids that, or, and the self-esteem thing too. I think that I grew up being told self-esteem, but not being told how to deal with self-esteem. How to grow it, how to nurture it. But then also the Dare campaign that Barbara Bush was was promoting. I remember that very well as well. Those were the two things I grew up with.
Me too. And funnily enough, like I don't know if you know this or not, but Dare actually they think now increased the amount of drugs that our generation used
I I
because
I believe it. I remember I was at King Middle School in Portland, Maine. We're both from Maine. I was at King Middle School in Portland, Maine, and this Portland police officer comes in and dumps a bag of cocaine, a bag of weed, and a bag of something else, and plus a bunch of needles on the table. He's like, "These are drugs, and you shouldn't do it." And I'm like, "Whoa, that looks really cool. Look at all those needles." and
and that's exactly what they found in the research was, you tell all these sixth grade kids about all these drugs and they aren't even thinking. I mean, most sixth graders aren't thinking about cocaine yet, but we told them all about cocaine and all these other drugs and almost made it sound cool and glamorized it in a way that encouraged them to use it. So
yeah,
that's my
honestly, like
sidebar of Dare.
I we always had those kids in school who would like skip school, go across the street into Daring Oaks Park, and just start doing drugs. And I almost like think the timeline matches. Like maybe they came in, and then in my head, a month later, these guys started skipping school because they figured out how to get this stuff or something.
Awesome, huh?
Yeah. Well, I know that you had a heart out very soon, coming up here in about 14 minutes. But Steve wanted me to let you know that he's looking forward to hearing this.
Good.
He's like, how you doing? Are you talking to Amy? Have you got this yet? So we have somebody who's rooting for this episode already.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
And yeah, man, I can't wait to get the band back together after the vaccine ship.
Right.
Someday. I've rarely go into Manhattan and see anybody anymore. And, I hope to do something with Steve as well. I want to do a recurring series. And since we both know Steve Cohen, for those of you who don't know, is a podcast producer and a TV producer. And he's just a really cool guy. And I want to do this series of episodes with him called Shooting the Shit with Steve. What do you think of that?
I think that's awesome. He between his quotes and his riddles and his questions that I'm sure he will ask and the things he has to say, I just love listening to his wisdom. So I think that's a brilliant idea. I would definitely listen to you guys.
All right, cool. All right, well, I'll let you. Oh, you know what? We got a couple minutes. So, what is it like? This will be I promise this will be my last question. And what is it like for you to live on a sailboat? Because I don't know if any of my listeners know this. You live on a sailboat full time now, right?
I do, and it's not just because of the pandemic. I've been here for 5 years, so in the Florida Keys, because I too was in Maine and I got cold, and I thought, what am I doing here? Once I gave up my day job as a therapist and I became an author, I had some flexibility, and I thought, wait, why would I sit here in the winter? It was like February, the snow was up over the window, and I'm like, why am I doing this? It's dark at 4 o'clock. So I thought, let's do something else. And my husband's dream since he was 4 years old was to live on a sailboat. It was never my dream. I didn't even really know people lived on sailboats, but I thought, well, whatever, let's give it a try. And so even though he'd been sort of planning this since he was 4, I basically within a matter of a couple of months said, all right, let's do this. And so we bought a sailboat slip, which down in the Florida Keys. So I'm not like bobbing around in the ocean for the most part. I'm tied to a dock, but it's pretty cool. We bought the original boat that we bought. We don't live in anymore. But he bought it just thinking it would last like 6 months at the most that I would be here, because he thought, I'm not sure you're going to like this. But here I am 5 years later. And so Hurricane Irma came through a few years ago and damaged a lot of boats. The first boat that we lived in got damaged a fair amount, but it also then meant that the boats that survived, a lot of people said, I don't want to be in sailboat life anymore. I don't want to be a boater. So they were selling their boats. So that allowed us to move up in boat. And we bought a 53-foot sailboat, and I love it. It's different in so many ways, but it's simple. I moved
Yeah.
here with a suitcase full of clothes and a laptop. And I thought, oh, life's much easier when you don't really have to worry about stuff, when you don't have to worry about a lot of the things that you have to worry about when you live in a house. And granted, sailboats aren't always easy. There's certain problems and strange issues that you run into. I had a octopus clog my air conditioner filter about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. So that's a problem I wouldn't have to deal with if I still lived in my house in Maine.
Mm.
However, it sure beats shoveling snow. So so I'll take it. But
Well,
I get to see manatees and dolphins and lots of really cool stuff that I wouldn't experience if I were still living in Maine.
yeah, I've never even seen a dolphin in real life, so that's really fascinating. What so when a hurricane is sweeping in, do you have to go to a hotel or do you stay on the boat?
Yeah, so I will not stay on my boat in a hurricane. I know people who do, but for me, no way. And so I wasn't here for Irma. I was back in Maine actually during that period. And so I just watched on the news and hoped for the best. But we had this, so this winter, this summer, we had, I never know what month it is or what season it is since I'm from Maine, and down here the weather's pretty much constant. So I'm always like, is it summer or winter? In Maine, you know quickly whether it's summer or winter.
Yeah.
But we had a bunch of tropical storms that came through. For the most part, they all missed us. We had one that was forecast to become a hurricane just recently, actually. So I did go to a hotel that night. It turned out to be fine. But for the most part, I'm not interested in being on the boat when it's super windy and wavy and rough.
Yeah, so that paints a better picture. 'Cause I was always curious what that looked like. So I guess that's it. Thank you for coming on the show. I really, really, really appreciate it. Like, you don't even know. I'm so inspired by this that I got up early. I set up all my equipment late last night. Really, really happy with this.
Can
And
I can I
sure,
ask you one question
yeah,
that I am super curious to know what your thoughts are? So I'm a
okay,
therapist in the mental health space. Obviously, I like it when people want to get their depression better, when they want to treat their anxiety. People in the arts, I hear this all the time. So I really want to know what your thoughts are on this. People in the arts will tell me that their depression helps them do better, or their anxiety fuels their creativity, and they don't want to get better. I mean, there's a part of them that does because they want to be happier, they want to be calmer. But then there's another part of them that says, but if I get this treated or I start to feel better, I won't be as creative anymore. I want to know, what's your thoughts on that?
it's half true.
Okay.
So I know that if I know where a lot of my depression, anxiety, and just sort of being miserable as an artist is rooted in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's part of me who loves the fact that I was able to lean heavily on the arts rather than destroying my life with drugs. Because it's usually one or the other with in this with the various stories. There are a lot more people I remember growing up with that leaned in on drugs and then they ended up working in insurance, and I'm glad that's not me.
Right.
At the same time, there's a part of me who would trade up some of the stuff that I had to grow up with and have a sort of a better brain than I felt like I have. I came into the world very unprepared for it in a lot of ways, not just in terms of education, but also mentally. I had to learn how to grow a thicker skin. I had to learn how to control sort of my emotions, my outbursts, my why the it was all my go-to reaction to almost anything is, how the fuck can't people see what I'm trying to do is awesome? I
Mm-hmm.
don't get it. And it used to just keep me up at night, but I don't know, half of me would trade up all of this to kind of be healthier mentally, to say, hey, well, I didn't have to deal with having a creepy grandfather who macked on one of my siblings, or I wouldn't, I would trade up a huge part of this talent that I've forced myself to develop And it really is a thing where I developed all of this craft just to kind of find a way to deal with the bullying. I mean, I was bullied badly by some people who went on to unfortunately be published authors, shouldn't have been. And then, but then also coming up in a community that didn't respect difference. It was almost like if you weren't a product of your environment, you weren't worth anything to the community, that kind of community. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, yeah, half of me would trade up all of that to be a little bit healthier mentally and physically. But at the same time, I know that I'm turning out work that I think will resonate with people like me, maybe younger people who didn't quite have access to a lot of the art and a lot of the sort of behind the creation commentary on what art is and how to interpret art. And I'm hoping now that my work can sort of reach out to people like me, obviously. And I don't know, it's 50-50. I don't romanticize depression. I think we really need to lean hard on solving the depression issue and making it less of a taboo in society. I some years back in like 2014, the summer of 2014, I actually worked on a sloop, a 40-foot sloop in New York Harbor, as a deckhand and a occasional fashion photographer. It was a weird setup, but I remember my first day with these people. The wife of the captain of the sailboat was like, "Oh my God, are you depressed?" Because just kind of the way I talked and the way I talked about especially film and media and fashion, because I had been let down by a lot of clients at that point. And I'm like, what kind of question is that? Why ask it like that too? Like, she asked it with such resentment and annoyance. And I was just like, I denied it, but I was like, she called me out on it. And I don't romanticize that. I would have rather not had that and not produced the work that came from that. And I know exactly what specific works I produced that came from that depression, that era. And it's just, it's 50-50. Like, I know that I'm able to use it. That's fine. But a huge part of me would totally give it up if it meant just kind of being healthier all around. So.
Interesting answer. Thank you. It's something I'm just so curious about because I hear it from so many people in the art world, and I hear their struggle about whether or not to treat their depression or their anxiety, just because there is that fear of I won't be able to be as creative. So I
honestly, like, I think that they've built their lives in a way where that's that's familiar to them, and so that's what they don't want to lose. We like what's familiar. We don't like change, as you know.
Right.
So, okay. So your heart out is pretty much now. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much. I love your podcast. I'm going to put links to your podcast in the description, and I'm also going to put links to your books in the description so people can find you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Hey, everybody. So that was Amy Morin. Thank you for joining us. So she has her own podcast if you want to listen to her. And I highly recommend it. It's called Mentally Strong People with Amy Morin. And the link is in the description. She's also got her website, link in the description. I'll put also links to her books. Well, I'll put a link to her Goodreads so you can see all of the books that she has on there. And you can link to various bookstores and Amazon through Goodreads. Drive some traffic to Goodreads. You can also follow her on social media. She's on Twitter. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you next time.